Yeah, today I talk about the son of the Buddha, Venerable Rahula. The Buddha's own son also became one of his great awakened disciples. He became the disciple of the Buddha foremost in being keen to train himself, which means foremost in having a strong desire, strong intention to follow the instructions of the Buddha. At age 29, the Bodhisatta, the Buddha-to-be, left his family and his wealth behind and became a spiritual seeker. He embarked on the noble search, to search for peace beyond birth, aging and death, beyond defilements and conditions. And at that time, the Bodhisatta also left behind his newborn son, Rahula, and his wife, Yasodharā. 7 years later, the Bodhisatta realized awakening and became the perfectly awakened one, the Buddha. And a few years after that, when he was already the most famous religious teacher with the largest following in India, then the Buddha returned to his hometown, Kapilavatthu, to meet and teach his family and his relatives for the first time. And that occasion is also the first time when little Rahula sees his father, the Buddha. And at that time, Rahula was probably maybe about 10 years old. And so the story from the Vinaya Pitaka, from the Mahavagga, is that the Buddha is walking to the residence of his father, King Suddhodana, sitting down on the seat prepared for him. And then Yasodharā, the previous wife of the Bodhisatta, says to their son, Rahula, "Rahula, this is your father. Go and ask him about your inheritance." So obviously there was this question. The Buddha was still alive and he would be the heir of the kingdom of the Sakyans. So then obviously this question comes up. Will he at some time would he come back to inherit his kingdom, or should someone else be appointed as an heir to the kingdom of the Sakyans? So the little boy, Rahula, goes to the Buddha, and as he gets closer to him, he stands in front of him, and Rahula says, "Your shadow is pleasant, monk." So, it seems the boy feels some calm and peace or purity of the Buddha and likes to be in his presence. But the Buddha gets up from his seat and goes away. So, little Rahula is following him, and so he's following close behind him and says, "Give him my inheritance, monk, give him my inheritance, monk." And so what will the Buddha give to his little son now who is asking him for his inheritance? Obviously the Buddha doesn't have any material inheritance to give away to his son anymore and to anyone else. The perfectly awakened one is only this spiritual inheritance for people. So then the Buddha is turning to Venerable Sariputta, who is standing close by, and he says, "Well, then let the boy Rahula go forth into homelessness," which means we should ordain him as a novice. So this is the inheritance of the Buddha, the holy life that leads to the realization of Nirvana, to liberation. And then Venerable Sariputta asks the Buddha, how should he ordain Rahula as novice? And then the Buddha says, his hair should be cut, then he should put on the robe, then he should bow to the monks, and then take the triple refuge, and that would be the going forth for the novices. And later he also explains then the 10 precepts of the novices. In this way, Venerable Rahula, the son of the Buddha, joins the monastic order and becomes the first Buddhist novice, the first samanera. So the plan of the relatives of the Buddha to sort out his inheritance went very different than they expected. And when the father of the Buddha, King Suddhodana, hears that Venerable Rahula became a novice, he's very unhappy, and he goes to the Buddha and asks him for a favor. And the Buddha says, Tathagatas are beyond giving favors. But then his father says, it's an allowable favor. And then the Buddha says, then please tell me, Gautama. And then he tells his son that already when the Bodhisatta went forth, he had experienced big sorrow. And then when Nanda, the Buddha's half-brother, became a monk, he again experienced great sorrow. And then when Rahula became a novice as well, he experienced extreme sorrow, he says. The reason is because his family lineage was broken. That there was no more son or grandson of him to inherit the throne of the Sakyans. And so then he says, the Buddha's father says, affection for a son cuts through the skin, through the flesh, through the sinews, through the bones, and penetrates into the marrow and stays there. And then he asks him for the favor that it would be good if monks would not let a child go forth into homelessness without permission of the parents. Then the Buddha gladdens his father with a Dhamma talk and later announces to the monks that he makes a rule that children should not be ordained without permission of the parents. The Buddha's father was still very concerned about his royal family lineage and his inheritance. However, most of his relatives, they gained an understanding of the Dhamma and they lost their interest in their material inheritance. Instead, they became true heirs of the Buddha, the awakened one. And Queen Ma Prajapati, the second wife of the father of the Buddha, became a nun. And the Buddha's half-sister, Nanda, became also a nun. And also the former wife of the Bodhisatta lost her interest in her material inheritance and joined the Buddha, became one of the 10 greatest Arahant nuns as well. And after the Buddha stayed as long as he found suitable at Kapilavatthu, he left his home city again and wandered onto Savatthi. And the Buddha's son, the boy Venerable Rahula, was then starting to practice the Dhamma and for becoming the true heir of his father, the Buddha. And so the father, the Buddha, is now living together with the young son to help him to develop the path to liberation. There was a nice little exchange between the two, between father and son in this Sutta Nipata. The Buddha asks his son whether he doesn't have any critical thoughts about him and whether he's always respectful to him. Maybe the Buddha gives him the short instruction because he noticed some tendency of disrespect in his attitude and he points it out to his son. So the Buddha asks his son, do you not despise the wise man because of constantly living with him? Is the torchbearer of humankind always respected by you? And Venerable Rahula answers, I do not despise the wise man because of constantly living with him. The torchbearer of humankind is always respected by me. And then the Buddha gives him a short instruction in verse. Having given up the 5 strands of sense pleasures, so pleasant and delightful to the mind, having renounced the home life out of faith, be one who makes an end to suffering. Associate with good friends, and resort to remote lodgings. Secluded, a place with little noise. Be moderate in eating. Do not give rise to craving for these. A robe and alms food, requisites in a lodging. Do not come back to the world again. Be restrained by the patimokkha and in the 5 sense faculties. Let your mindfulness be directed to the body. Be full of disenchantment towards the world. Avoid the sign of sense objects, which is beautiful and connected with desire. Develop your mind on the unattractive. Make it unified and well concentrated. And develop the signless state. Discard the latent tendency to conceit. Then, by breaking through conceit, you will live in tranquil peace. In such a way, the Blessed One often exhorted the Venerable Rahula with these verses. A more detailed teaching that the Buddha gave to his son when he was still younger can be found in Majjhima Nikaya 61. The sutta is also one that King Asoka recommends in one of his edicts for reflection already 2,300 years ago. And at that time, the Buddha is living in Vilavana, in the bamboo grove in Rajagaha, and Venerable Rahula is living close by. Probably little Rahula said something which was untrue at the time. Maybe he told a lie as joke. And then the Buddha, who knew that, he got up from his meditation in the evening and went to visit his son. And so Venerable Rahula sees the Buddha coming in the distance and prepares some seed for him and some water for washing the feet. So then after the Buddha is washing his feet, then the Buddha is leaving a little bit of water in the water vessel and asks Venerable Rahula, Rahula, do you see this little water left in the water vessel? Yes, Venerable Sir. Even so little, Rahula, is the monkhood of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. Then the Blessed One threw away the little water that was left and asked Venerable Rahula, Rahula, do you see that little water that has been thrown away? Yes, Venerable Sir. Even so, Rahula, those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie have thrown away their monkhood. Then the Blessed One turns the water vessel upside down and asks the Venerable Rahula, Rahula, do you see this water vessel turned upside down? Yes, Venerable Sir. Even so, Rahula, those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie have turned the recluse ship, the monkhood, upside down. Then the Blessed One turned the water vessel right way up again and asked the Venerable Rahula, Rahula, do you see this hollow, empty water vessel? Yes, Venerable Sir. Even so hollow and empty, Rahula, is the monkhood of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. And so, he gives him this teaching in a quite drastic way, that it's essential for the Dharma practice to develop truthfulness. And after that, he gives him a teaching on reflecting about his actions. And so, if you want to purify your actions, or learn how to act more skillfully, then obviously it's difficult to learn from your actions unless you are true to yourself in being clear about what you did and what you didn't do. And then one of the purposes of the teaching of the Buddha is to see things as they really are and abandon delusion. And it's also a gradual development. And if you can't even distinguish on the most basic level between true and false, or if you do things which are deceptive, then you will also be unable to abandon or see the various deceptions of your own mind on a more subtle level. Otherwise, if you develop truthfulness, you will be able to gradually see more and more what is for your own benefit and for the benefit of others, and what is for your harm and for the harm of others, and seeing which tendencies in the mind leads to more disturbance, more suffering, which tendencies, which actions leads to more peace, and being able to reflect about the actions and the results. And that's the next part of the teaching of the Buddha that he gave to his own son. And so he teaches his son he should reflect about his actions just like looking into a mirror. And so he says, before acting by body, speech or mind, then you should reflect or ask yourself if this action will lead to the harm of yourself or of others, or to the benefit. And so if you expect some harm, then rather not to do it. And also while you do an action, you can observe the immediate results of this action and noticing if any harm comes up or whether it's beneficial, and then depending on the observation, continue or stop. And then afterwards also, if you have done an action, then you should check for the long-term results. If it was actually harmful, then there is just to confess this action and resolve not to do it again. So, in a way, changing one's way of behavior to a different way. And if it was a beneficial action, then you can delight that you're making progress and continue to train yourself to become even more skillful in what you do with your mind and how you act. And this teaching also contains some basic lessons about karma, because karma is action. Or often the Buddha says karma is intention as well, so intentional action. So that we have some ability to choose how we act, whether we do an action or not. And that our actions will have consequences, either more beneficial or more harmful. And so you can gradually get more skillful in doing things that lead to your own benefit and also for the benefit of others. And the result of your actions, they show themselves in two different patterns. So some actions, they give immediate results, so you notice immediately some effect. Some results of actions you will only notice after a long time. So, let's say with meditation, practicing mindfulness of breathing, then maybe you notice some effects while you're meditating of the meditation practice. But then maybe some effects you only notice afterwards or over a longer period of time. And seeing that results take time to ripen. It's also an important lesson, because then of not measuring, so that you don't measure your pleasure or pain only by how it feels in the present, but also to think about the harm that something can bring that feels pleasant now, later, and also to think or reflect about the long-term benefit about something that's difficult to do. And the fact that your own actions, especially what you do with your mind, have some results in the present, that shows that what you do now with your mind can make a huge difference for how much or how little suffering or happiness you experience in the circumstances you find yourself in. There's lots of important teachings included. The short instruction to the Buddha's own son. If you reflect about your actions like this, then they can also develop various important character traits. So one of them is heedfulness, because you realize that the actions make a difference in terms of leading to benefit or harm, and you will experience the results of your actions. Then also compassion, because you have trained yourself not to harm anyone. And truthfulness, because you're interested to act more skillfully and to learn from your mistakes. And integrity, you take responsibility for any harm that you have done. And also wisdom, because you gradually become more able to convince yourself to choose your actions based on long-term results, and not just based on your mood or what you just spontaneously like or dislike. And developing this reflection about your actions is also something that helps for developing mindfulness and samadhi. Develop clear comprehension, the ability to clearly see what you are doing while you are doing it, and also the results of your actions. And mindfulness, you train yourself to examine your actions and intention, and that remembering lessons from what I did in the past. And ardency, sense of trying the best to avoid harm and do what is beneficial. And so at the end the Buddha says then, whatever recluses and Brahmins in the past, the present or future, are purifying their actions, they do it in this way. So they, by reflecting repeatedly about them. And so universal practice that leads to developing oneself. Another longer discourse of the Buddha to his son can be found in Majjhima Nikaya 62. And at that time they are staying at Chetas Grove on Atapinika's park. And the Buddha is going on alms round, and Venerable Rahula is following close behind him. And according to the commentary, while Venerable Rahula is walking behind the Buddha, he notices how beautiful and serene the Buddha looks, and then he thinks that he looks similar to him somehow, and like his father. And the Buddha, who knows the thoughts of his son, is turning around and looking at his son. And he tells Rahula, any kind of form, material, any kind of form, whether past, present or future, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all material form should be seen as it actually is with proper wisdom thus. This is not mine. I'm not this. This is not myself. So he's just turning around and already working against the tendency of his little son to teach him. And then Rahula asks him, only material form, Blessed One? Only material form, Sublime One? Material form, Rahula, and feeling, perception, formations and consciousness. Yeah, and so then when Rahula is stirred up by this teaching of the Buddha, and he's considering who would go into town for alms rounds when he gets personally admonished by the Blessed One. He just turns around immediately and goes back in seclusion on the root of a tree and sits down and establishes mindfulness. And when Sariputta is seeing him sitting there and encouraging him to develop mindfulness of breathing, that would lead to his great benefit. And then in the evening, when Rahula is getting up from his meditation and goes to see his father, the Buddha, and pays homage to him, and then asks the Buddha, how should mindfulness of breathing be developed so that it's of great fruit and great benefit? We can see, so this little story, in the beginning I mentioned that Venerable Rahula was the Buddha's disciple foremost in being keen to train himself. And so this little story is an example where you can see what it means. And he gets this instruction, and then he immediately wants to apply it and doesn't even go on alms rounds and just goes back to a quiet place and meditates. The Buddha gives a simile of an excellent trainable horse. And for example, this excellent horse, even if it just sees the shadow of a whip, is already stirred up and thinks, what task will my trainer let me do today? What can I do to follow him? And so I think it's whatever the horse is already keen to, if he gets the slightest hint by the trainer, to already follow whatever he tells him to do. And so when Rahula had the same attitude, and when the Buddha gives him some instruction, he applies all his effort to it and tries to practice it. And so to have this complete dedication to a teacher also requires a complete sense of trust. Between parents and children, there's usually already a high level of trust. And if they develop the same Dhamma qualities together, then this sense of unity or closeness or trust becomes even stronger. So when Rahula had this strong sense of trust because his teacher, the Buddha, was his father. And additionally, he developed this stronger closeness and unity with the Buddha by applying his instruction and developing these Dhamma qualities that the Buddha already had perfected, and he had only partially. And so this is why he had this complete dedication to apply all his efforts to the instruction of the Buddha. And that's something that can develop between parents and children if they practice the Dhamma together. When Rahula asks about the instruction of mindfulness of breathing, but the Buddha gives him first another instruction to contemplate the 4 elements, or the 32 body parts, and then contemplate them in groups as the 4 elements. So, for example, he says, whatever internally belongs to oneself is solid, solidified and clung to, that is, head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, and so on. This is called the internal earth element. And it's the internal earth element and the external earth element, so external material objects. They are simply the earth element. And that should be seen as it actually is with proper wisdom thus. This is not mine. I'm not this. This is not myself. When one sees it thus, as it actually is, with proper wisdom, one becomes disenchanted with the earth element and makes the mind dispassionate towards the earth element. So he's giving a more detailed explanation on this one sentence that he told him on Arms Round. As far as I know, that's the most detailed instruction by the Buddha, how to contemplate the 4 elements. That's also how I usually recommend to do it, to first get experience with the contemplation of the 32 body parts, and then later contemplate them as earth element, and so on. And so, by doing that, you can develop a perception of non-self, anatta, with regard to the body. And then later, after that, the Buddha also tells him he should develop meditation that is like the earth, in the sense that he tries to make his mind equanimous. If he develops meditation that is like the earth, arisen agreeable and disagreeable contacts will not invade your mind and remain. Just like people throw clean things and dirty things on the earth, and the earth is not repelled, humiliated or disgusted because of that. And so too, develop meditation is like the earth, in the sense of making the mind equanimous with the whatever sense contacts come. And then only afterwards also mentions the 4 Brahma Viharas and the unattractiveness of the body, and then the perception of impermanence. So this is if it develops meditation on loving kindness, then ill will or aversion will be abandoned. If you develop compassion, cruelty will be abandoned. If you develop sympathetic joy, mudita, then discontent will be abandoned. And if you develop equanimity, also aversion will be abandoned. Then if you develop meditation on unattractiveness, desire will be abandoned. If it develops meditation on impermanence, or if it develops the perception of impermanence, then conceiving I am will be abandoned. And then only after that he teaches him instruction on mindfulness of breathing. And the usual 16 instructions of developing mindfulness of breathing, different qualities in terms of noticing, for example, the short, is the breath short or long, training oneself to be aware of the whole body, for example, or stilling the bodily formation, so more like, for example, noticing the stillness of the body on the breath, or breathing in and out, gladdening the mind. So, these different qualities you can develop with mindfulness of breathing, or different things you can direct the mind to. Then at the end he says, if you develop mindfulness of breathing like this, then even the final in-breath and out-breath are known as they cease, not unknown. So then you will be even mindfully clearly comprehending as you do the last in and out breath. According to the commentary, Venerable Rahula applied the instruction that the Buddha gave him diligently until he was about 20 years old. So he still practiced for quite a longer time, maybe for 10 years or 7 years as monk. And then at one point the Buddha sees that the states that leads to liberation have been sufficiently developed by Venerable Rahula. So he has developed the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path to a level sufficient to become an Arahant. And at that time, the Buddha is again living in Savatthi and noticing that the development of his own son has reached a stage which is sufficient to realize complete liberation. He's after alms rounds, he is telling his son to come with him to a secluded place. And then it says many thousands devatas also following the Buddha and thinking, today the Blessed One will lead the Venerable Rahula to the destruction of the taints. And so they go to a grove and sit down at the root of a tree. And the Buddha gives him a instruction or Dhamma talk on the 6 sense bases, the impermanence and dukkha and non-self of the 6 sense bases and all feeling that arises based on them. And while hearing this last instruction of the Buddha, then the remaining defilements get abandoned and he realizes complete liberation. And also the several thousand devas become stream enterers at that occasion. After Venerable Rahula had completed his own Dhamma practice, he kept a low profile in the monastic order. He didn't have any ambition for a prominent special position in the monk's order. Normally, people probably expect that the Buddha's own son would have some eminent position, maybe even become the successor of the Buddha after he passes away, and then maybe take over the position of his father to be the leader of the entire Buddhist community. But of course, this idea of family inheritance is only a worldly concept, and the Buddha didn't follow that in the monastic order. So the Buddha wouldn't put monks into the most important positions because they were his blood relatives, but he would give these positions to monks who were best qualified for them. And Venerable Rahula knew that, as he was already an Arahant, and he knew that, for example, monks like Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mamoggallana, or Venerable Ananda were the best qualified monks for those important positions. So naturally kept out of these sort of positions which involved some status in the monastic order. this was the story of fortunate Rahula. Why is he called fortunate Rahula by people? He explained himself in his own Therigatha verses, and he says, they know me as fortunate Rahula for two reasons. Because I'm the son of the Buddha, and because I've seen the Dhamma. So I was in this both ways fortunate. To be reborn a son of someone who becomes a Sammasambuddha, a perfectly awakened one. It's obviously something extremely special. He used his closeness to his father to learn from him and follow his instructions and realize the Dhamma. In the beginning, I told the story how the Buddha visits his home city Kapilavatthu for the first time, and then little Rahula asks the Buddha for his inheritance. Also, what did Rahula inherit from his father? And he didn't inherit any material things. He also didn't inherit any special position in the monks' community, and instead he became the true heir of his father, the Buddha, because he realized the Dhamma. And that's the most important thing.